Hello, and welcome to another edition of Coffee Talk with immigration attorney Brian D. Lerner. In this particular episode, I would like to concentrate on military naturalization. Now, what exactly is that and how does it affect you? Well, naturalization basically is the way of becoming a U.S. citizen, okay? And there are different other ways of becoming U.S. citizens, such as obviously such as being born in the U.S. There's all different kinds of ways to derive or acquire U.S. citizenship, depending if you were not born in the U.S. and your parents were or your grandparents were. There's a whole different variety, and I've got different videos on derivation of citizenship and acquisition of citizenship. But in this particular episode, this video, I would like to concentrate on military naturalization. What's different? And how can you become a citizen because you have served in the military? Well, there's a couple different provisions, and let me just tell you that just briefly, to become a citizen normally, the basic requirements are that you have to have been in the U.S. For at least half of the statutory time, excuse me, that you were going to need in order to apply for citizenship. So, for example, if the statutory time is 5 years, which most of it is, then you have to be physically present in the U.S. for 2.5 years. Then you have to have good moral character, which that basically translates to not having crimes or child support that you're not paying, things like that, tax evasion, all of that. And then, of course, there is the English requirement. You don't need to have a master's in English, but of course you have to be able to converse in English. And if somebody writes on a paper, the dog is running and has a red ball, you should be able to read that and say what it says. And then, of course, there's the history test, which you basically know who are the what are the branches of government, who's the president, and all that. Well, when someone serves in the military, the United States gives them preference in which to obtain naturalization. And in some cases, the preference is very beneficial, because in some cases where they absolutely would not qualify or ever qualify on normal naturalization terms, the military does have the option, and if they fall under this provision, which I'll get into, of becoming a U.S. citizen. So generally, what branches of the military are we talking about here? Well, basically it's the Army, Navy, Marine Corps, the Air Force, Coast Guard, and certain reserve components of the National Guard. So if you happen to just be in the National Guard period, of course, make sure you fall under one of the provisions. And then there are selected reserve of the Ready Reserve. So those are the military branches that will qualify. Now, there are basically two different provisions of the Immigration and Nationality Act that apply to military naturalization. And what I want to talk first is about the provision that basically you have served in the military, you're currently serving, and or you've been discharged from service, but not necessarily in a time of war. Okay, and that's the broader one. That's the one that more people in the military will qualify for. So what are the for this particular provision under the Immigration and Nationality Act? What are the basic requirements? Well, again, you have to show you have good moral character. And of course, when showing that also, if you obtained lawful permanent residency through either a fraudulent means or a means that is that you're not able to show that you qualified for in the first place, just a heads up, not only will you be denied naturalization, or could you be denied naturalization, they could put you in deportation proceedings and removal proceedings and try to revoke your green card. So, for example, and I'll give this as a side, somebody gets petitioned by an employer, but the employer, for example, doesn't really exist, or the employer went belly up before the green card was given, or they never really employed you in what they were petitioning to employ you for. Of course, that's fraud, okay? And if that comes up when you try to naturalize, that means you are going most likely to end up in removal proceedings. So, as a heads up, don't just jump into naturalization without having a proper consultation if you qualify, and what are the requirements and what possible risks exist. So, in the particular provision that we're talking about now, the Immigration and Nationality Act, for this division of military naturalization, again, you have to show good moral character, you have to demonstrate knowledge of the English language, and again, it doesn't have to be perfect. Basically, if I can just carry on a normal conversation with somebody and understand what they're saying, that really is sufficient. I know a lot of people are very nervous because it's not their first language, but as long as you can carry on a normal conversation, it should be okay. Now, you, of course, have to demonstrate knowledge of U.S. government and history, or known as the civics exam, and a little bit of studying will get you through that. And then also, you need to demonstrate attachment to the United States by taking an oath of allegiance to the U.S. Constitution. Now, obviously, if you are a military personnel, you're definitely showing that you have allegiance to the United States because you're fighting on behalf of the United States, or you're serving on behalf of the United States. So that's a fairly easy one to get. But keep in mind, if you do get dishonorably discharged, there are certain provisions that kick in that, at least for this one, that take away your eligibility for naturalization. Now, as a member of the military, there are certain normal naturalization requirements that you're exempted from. And one, of course, is the residency and physical presence requirements in the United States. So again, let's say we're talking about a normal naturalization where you have to, have been physically present for at least 50% of the time that you were supposed to be in the U.S., and you had to be a resident for at least 5 years. So in a normal one, you're resident for 5 years, and you're physically present for at least 2.5 years, and as another, that you're not gone from the U.S. more than 6 months at a time. Well, under this first provision of military naturalization, those residency and physical presence requirements will be waived, because obviously if you're serving in Iraq, or you're overseas on a ship for all the time, it would be hard to be physically present in the United States at the time. So what are the elements that make it so you qualify for this particular provision of military naturalization? Well, you have served honorably for a total of 1 or more years, and we're talking that's all it takes, 1 or more years, not 5 years, not 10 years, just 1 or more, that you are a lawful permanent resident. So obviously, to file under this provision of military naturalization, you had to be admitted as a lawful permanent resident at some point, and you will be filing for your application for naturalization while you are still in service, or within 6 months after being discharged. So, of course, if it's been 6 months and 1 day after you had been discharged, then under this provision, you're not going to qualify. So, if you are in the military and you happen to realize that you've served at least a year, well, go and get the necessary documents to go forward in which to apply for military naturalization. There will be, the normal N400, the G, which is the whole naturalization application, the G325, which is the biographic sheet, and then of course you're going to have the document that shows from a commanding officer either that you are in the military and are active, or that you were discharged honorably within the last 6 months. And with the military naturalization, you do not need to pay a filing fee, which that approaches around $600. You do not need to pay a biometrics fee, where they take your fingerprints and they make certain you have no criminal history. That approaches 675, give or take, and minus other things. So you're saving, as far as just filing fees alone, around $1,000. So that would be the first provision of natural military naturalization. Now, what about the other one? What about the other provision, which less people in the military will qualify for, but in fact it is more powerful, really, in that in this particular provision, number one, it doesn't require a lot of the elements that the normal naturalization requires. When we're talking about the first provision, which is what I just spoke about, more or less it's the same as a regular naturalization, except you don't have to pay the fees. It gets expedited. As a matter of fact, when you file a military naturalization at the Nebraska Service Center, they have 6 months in which to adjudicate it, and if they don't, they need to explain why. So that goes faster, and then your physical presence and residency requirements are waived. Well, not waived, but they're relaxed. So the next provision applies to members of the U.S. Armed Forces who currently serve or have served in active duty status during authorized periods of conflict. Okay, and the president is the one, through executive order, that designates what is an authorized period of conflict. I mean, you have the obvious ones, World War One, World War Two, the Korean War, and Iraq and so forth. And so, if you happen to fall within one of those areas of actually serving within active duty status within one of those authorized periods, you may qualify if, number one, you served honorably in the U.S. Armed Services during an authorized period of conflict. Now, note, this doesn't say you had to physically be there. It just says that you had to serve within that time. So if you happen to be, serving in some computer room in Iowa in the military during a period of conflict, well, then you will fall under this. The key, of course, is, was it a period of conflict? You then, after enlistment, now here's the kicker here. After enlistment, you were lawfully admitted as a permanent resident of the United States, or, and this is a big or, at the time of enlistment, re-enlistment, or induction, you were physically present in the United States or qualifying territory. So what does that mean? That means that you could be on a ship that is for non-commercial service, that is a military, U.S. military ship in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and that would qualify. So you don't have to be a lawful permanent resident or ever have been a lawful permanent resident in order to fall under this particular provision. But of course, you need to meet the other section of where it was that you enlisted, you re-enlisted, or were inducted, and that you at one point or another were physically present in the U.S. or qualifying territory. And so, depending where you are, if you're thinking you may qualify, but you don't know if you were in a qualifying territory, of course, give me a call. Let me know. I'll be able to determine whether or not there's a reasonable argument that at some point you were and you may fall under this. And so in this particular form of military naturalization, there is not really any element that you have good moral character. So, as a matter of fact, you could have committed a crime, you could be an aggravated felon under the immigration laws, and so forth, and that is not a bar to stopping you from naturalizing and becoming a U.S. citizen. And in fact, I've had different cases where, had they not served honorably in the particular time, a designated time of hostilities, that they not only would not qualify to become a U.S. citizen, but they would be deported, and many would have been deported the rest of their lives from the U.S. So, these issues come up in different times. For example, sometimes I'll be representing somebody in removal proceedings trying to fight to just stay here in the United States and not be deported, only to find out that, in fact, after questioning them, they qualify for this section of military naturalization. And in a couple of the cases, I've had the proceedings terminated so that they could apply and then become a U.S. citizen. Sometimes people will do the various crimes or whatever many, many years ago when they're young or stupid, whatever they say. But now they've served in the military, they have a family, they've been here for 30 years, whatever it is. So the U.S. wants to give back to those people who help serve in the United States military service on behalf of the U.S. And this is one way of doing it. And just so you know, if you happen to be a spouse, if you're married to a U.S. citizen who is a member of the armed services, and they have become a U.S. citizen, then you, the spouse, may also be eligible for expedited naturalization in this particular provision. So if you like the video, click like and so forth. And again, I usually put out videos once a week, give or take, and some in Spanish, some in English. And then go ahead and send me an email if you have questions, or respond, get a free consultation, and then from there, I'll be happy to help you. Okay, more on the coming video.